I'm Sue Siglowski, VSBA Executive Director, and I'd like to introduce the rest of the VSBA staff who are with us here tonight. We have Carrie Lamb, who's the Director of Operations, Sandra Cameron, Associate Executive Director, and Phil Gore, Director of Board Services. Phil's going to be presenting tonight's program on supporting good governance, and we're very glad all of you could join us. I'm going to turn it over to Phil now.
Well, thank you, Sue. It's always a privilege to talk about good governance. This is something I've kind of dedicated my life to for about 20 years. And it's especially fortunate for me in this time in Vermont. I just came here 6.5 months ago. And I find that there's a lot of interest in this topic. And so I'm really glad to see that and to be a part. Frankly, the way we do our business as school boards is extremely important. And I think it behooves all of us to think deeply about what's at stake. What's at stake if we govern well or don't govern well? Why is this important? Well, one of the things that we know is at stake is the public's trust in public education. There are a lot of critics of public education, not just in your district or statewide, but nationwide, and even in other countries. There's skepticism about whether we should have public schools or not. Well, that has an effect on people's confidence, their support, their willingness to send their children, and their willingness to pay for what is necessary to educate children. If we look at this, frankly, one of the things that's at stake truly is our future as a republic. You know, there has to be an educated citizenry, and not just part of the citizens, but if we want our children to grow up and be productive contributors to our society, they're going to need to be educated to do that and informed in order to vote and participate in the governance of our country. The third thing I would say that's very important when you think about what's at stake for school boards governing well is children's futures. It's not just about taxpayers' money or maintaining a democracy over time. It really is also about individual lives, students' lives, their success, their fulfillment and happiness. Well, why do I even mention this? One of the things that research has shown in our country over the last 30 years is that it matters who is on the school board, and it matters how school boards govern. School boards, in fact, do have an impact. They seem to have an effect on how students are doing in school districts. One of the number one ways that we can have an effect as school board members, positive effect, if you will, is to focus. We know that when school boards focus on what matters most, student achievement is likely to be improving in a school district. Now, let me just pause right there, because it's not just about achievement overall. It truly is about individuals' lives, their experiences, their opportunities, their thoughts about education and learning. School boards make a positive difference, again, when they focus on what matters most, when they work together as a team, and when they follow effective courses of action. When that happens, student outcomes are likely to be improving. Research suggests these certain aspects of governance have a direct relationship on the overall student learning within a school system. Boards having clear and specific goals that are shared by the board and the superintendent. Those priorities, if you will, when they're clear, people can execute and are more likely to be doing good work throughout the system. The other area that we find in the research is boards having clear protocols. Often we call those an operating protocol when they're in writing, but these are the norms and behaviors of the board that can have an effect on how students are learning in the classroom. And finally, I would just add to this idea of board processes. When our processes, things like adopting a policy, setting a budget, selecting a superintendent, evaluating a superintendent, evaluating programs, even our grievance process, when our processes are transparent and predictable, then people know what to expect, and they're able to be in sync and supportive of the work a school board does. For me, this is the big question, the big governance question. How are our students doing? It's not a question about how the adults are doing, although that can be very important. Ultimately, our work as a board needs to be, how are our students doing? And then we have to ask ourselves, how do we know? Do we know because we heard from a child or a family member or a teacher or an administrator? How do we know how the students are doing? What data do we have to suggest our students are doing well or not doing well? In hand with that is, what is the system, our school system, doing to improve how students are doing academically and their well-being? And then also the board needs to be mindful of, how will we know whether we're making progress? How do we know whether our students who came to school this August, September, if they're actually having a year's worth of growth by the time they leave in May or June? How do we know that they're safe, that they're feeling safe, that they're having positive experiences about learning? These are questions that when boards make the focus of their conversation, they're likely to be governing systems that are improving in student learning. There are 3 research studies I would love for all school board members to be familiar with. The first was one by Tom Alsbury in the early 1990s. His study has been replicated by other researchers in many universities across the country. But Tom was a school administrator and working on a doctorate degree. He did a study that showed a relationship between boards misbehaving and the likelihood that students were experiencing a decrease in student achievement. Tom had he went on to be a professor, and he had a student by the name of Mary Della Gardell, who was hearing Tom talk about all the harm school boards could do. And Mary simply looked at Tom one day and said, if school boards actually have the power to do harm, couldn't they also have the power to do good? And Mary's work showed us in the late 1990s and early 2000s that it matters what school boards believe is possible, and that their beliefs about what is possible informs how they govern at the dais. A researcher in Montana who was a 20-year school board member, and his research partner, Bill, Ivan and Bill found that there are specific actions of school boards that seem to correlate or correspond to the likelihood a district is improving in student learning. So again, Tom Alsbury presenting on his research that showed when boards behave badly, what's some examples of bad behavior? Well, violating executive session rules and laws, right? Talking about privileged information, perhaps about a teacher's health or student, anything to do with students, inappropriately or out of turn to other people. You know this, the public rarely cares who's on the school board, but when they care, they really care. So the public will tolerate boards acting up, behaving badly to some extent, but they won't tolerate it forever. And Tom's research showed that when boards are behaving badly, the public will say, enough of that, out with the rascals, and unseat board members, which often results in turnover in the superintendency, and then a clear connection to changes in policy and goals and personnel, the way people are evaluated in their programs. Tom showed statistically that was likely to result in a decrease in student achievement. And Mary Della Gardell passed away a few years ago, but this is a colleague of hers who was involved with the early Iowa Lighthouse research. And what Mary and her colleagues found was that school boards' beliefs about what is possible, beliefs about their ability of their system, their teachers and principals, to actually support improved student achievement, that when boards had high beliefs about what is possible, student achievement was likely to be improving in a school system. And just 5 of the top takeaways from that study, if you were to do a Google search about school governance research, the Iowa Lighthouse study would emerge as one of the most influential studies, at least since the 1970s. They found that when the board sets clear and high expectations, holds the system accountable, creates conditions for success, builds public support for improving achievement in the system, and then something they hadn't sought out to look at, but something they discovered over a decade or more, is that when school boards learn together as a team, their system is likely to be improving in student achievement. Fascinating if you think about it, just from a systems thinking perspective. When the people at the top of the school system are learning together as a team, they're likely to be leading a system that is improving in learning. Ivan Lawrenson again came along in early 2010 to 13. He found statistical correlations between specific actions of school boards that relate to improving student learning. And these actions, these 6 that are listed here, they found to be highly statistically significant. What does that mean? It means they're important, right? So that when a school system has goals for the superintendent that are focused on student outcomes, that system is likely to be improving in student learning. They found these other 5 areas: communicating those expectations for the superintendent to the community, basing decisions about the superintendent's contract on an objective evaluation, that when the board was collaborating with staff and the community on a district plan, when they had a plan and they executed on the plan, and the board based its work on district goals and monitored progress toward those goals. These 6 things were found to be likely to correlate with improving student achievement in a school system. So you see sort of this connection, if you will, between the board having high expectations, setting clear and measurable goals, and then monitoring progress along the way. Those are the systems that tend to be improving in student learning. So back to this idea of how are the students in your district doing? We could hope and promote this idea that that is the centerpiece of every school district board's conversation. How are our students doing? How do we know? What data do we have that suggests that they're safe, that they're improving in their ability to think critically, that they're improving in their ability to collaborate, that they're improving in their learning, whether it's of math or science or English or any topic? How do we know how they're doing? When students are at the center of the conversation, students tend to be doing well and feel very supported. Within this context, though, we have to think about, how is the board doing? And I would ask you, how is your board doing? Are people bored? Are they disengaged? Are they leaning toward micromanagement? How is your board doing? A very wise woman told me many years ago, she had been president of my state association in Washington, where I served as a board member. And she said, the most powerful thing that a school board has is the question. You might think about, what types of questions is your board asking? Are they asking questions about students and how students are doing? Or are they asking questions about killer bees? What are the killer bees? Buses, budgets, bonds, ball games. There's a lot of things that are happening in a school system that are not the main thing. When your board is focused on the main thing, they're likely to be governing a system that is improving in achievement. And I would say just one specific thing about questions. You can ask the same question, you can use the same word, but with completely different intents and completely different effect. We have to, in order to govern well, we have to ask open-ended questions, questions that invite people to share their story, to tell us more, as opposed to an accusatory question. Now, let's give an easy example. One would be a board member asking the superintendent, why did that happen? As opposed to asking the superintendent, tell me why that happened. Help me understand. How do we ask a question in a way that invites people to lean in and have a conversation, our fellow board members, our community members, our superintendent, even our students? How do we ask questions that help people lean in so that we can find common ground and stay in the conversation rather than come across like we're accusing people or micromanaging? I'd encourage you to give that some thought. One way that we can sum up good governance, and this may work for some of you, is the acronym FASTER. And when I say FAST, I mean focus, align, stretch, and track. When a school board is focused, they're aligning the work that they're doing and what the system is doing. When their agendas are aligned with what they said were the goals for the district, and they're stretching and they're tracking progress, they're likely to be leading systems that are improving in student learning. I add that ER on there because in the spirit of continuous improvement, it's not simply about focus, align, stretch, and track. We also have to evaluate our progress. How are we doing as a board? And how is the system doing as a result? How are our students doing? And we revise our plan. We adjust. If we learned anything through the recent pandemic, one is the need for us to be flexible and not be locked in. Yes, it's important to have a plan, but let's not let the tail wag the dog. It was hard to get that out. Let's make sure that the main thing is the students and how they're doing, and the plan is supporting that work. Again, I can't emphasize enough the idea of team learning. If you as an individual are coming to the annual conference, wonderful. We're glad that you're there. You know what would be most powerful, most effective? Is if your whole board came. Is if at least a quorum of your board came, but ideally your whole board and superintendent, and you had a shared learning experience. So it's not just one person going back to the board and saying, hey, I got all these great ideas. We know how that goes over. Not at all. But when the board learns together as a team, we can do things that are actionable toward improvement. And I would just end with this quote. Nothing I've said here is meant to shame or blame or point fingers or make somebody feel bad because their board hasn't had a plan or they haven't been focused. The idea here really is do the best you can until you know better. Then when you know better, do better.